A sound tore through the street, sharp, wet, final. The sickening crack of bone, followed by a boy's scream that rose like a siren, sent a chill crawling across every doorway, every window, every chest. Ion hit the pavement hard, his body curled around his right arm, now limp and bent at a wrong angle. His face contorted in pain. But he didn't cry. Not after the first scream, just grit his teeth and trembled as the black belt thug towered over him, breathing slow and steady like nothing had happened. This is what happens when you say no, the man growled, loud enough for the entire block to hear. He turned his gaze on the bystanders, shopkeepers frozen in place, teenagers with half-raised phones, a mother clutching her child just beyond a fruit stall. Anyone else feel brave today? No one moved. The man adjusted the black belt tied loosely around his modified GI jacket, more streetwear than uniform now. It flared slightly with the breeze as he stepped back from a boy. His grin curled like it had been carved in stone, a look not of triumph but habit. This wasn't the first time he'd done this, and it wouldn't be the last. The boy Ion was 17, thin, hands blistered from long days stacking boxes and mopping floors in the corner store his parents once ran. Parents who were gone now, left to run the place himself. Ion refused to pay protection money to the local thug network. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply said, no, that was all. And that had been enough to break his arm. Across the street, at a cracked table outside an old tea shack, a man sat quietly. He hadn't touched his drink. He hadn't moved since the confrontation began. But now he looked up. Chuck Norris wore a simple faded jacket and a cap pulled low. His hands rested loosely on his thighs, eyes steady. No one recognized him. Yet he didn't need to be recognized. Not yet. His gaze was fixed, not on the thug, but on the boy. Ion tried to move. Failed. His face pressed against the dirty concrete, eyes squeezed shut. The thug stepped closer, raised his foot, and kicked the boy in the ribs. The thud of impact was dull, the gas that followed sharper. Chuck stood, no drama, no flourish. He pushed his chair back slowly, reached into his jacket to leave a few bills on the table, and began walking one step at a time. His boots made a soft thump on the worn street. The crowd didn't notice him at first. All eyes were still on Ion. A few phones were recording. Most weren't. People had seen worse and learned that filming didn't stop fists. But then something shifted. The thug looked up, saw Chuck approaching. His brow furrowed. "You want to be next, Grandpa?" He barked, spreading his arms like a dare. Chuck said nothing. He kept walking. A woman gasped. A shopkeeper took a step back. One of the teens lowered his phone, sensing something different in the way this man moved. Slow, controlled, not like someone looking for trouble, like someone who had already lived through it. Chuck stopped beside the boy. He didn't look at the thug, not yet. He crouched slowly, one knee down, and placed a hand gently on one's shoulder. "You're still breathing," Chuck said quietly. "Good. You stood your ground." Lion's eyes fluttered open. He nodded once. Chuck stood again. And that's when people noticed. The way his stance changed. He unzipped his jacket and let it fall behind him, onto the ground. The wind caught the edge of his shirt, revealing the faint outline of old scars across his forearms. The thug scoffed. "Are you serious? You think taking off your coat makes you tough?" Still no response. Chuck's eyes finally met the thug's. Cold, measured, unshaken, and somewhere in the silence between them, the street held its breath. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The coroner's store wasn't much to look at, just a faded green awning, a cracked window taped over with plastic, and shelves lined with canned goods, noodles and bulk rice in torn sacks. But to Ion, it was everything. His father built it from nothing. His mother ran it with love. And after the accident, it became the last thing tying him to a life that once made sense. He had been running it alone for 2 years now. 17, no siblings, no guardians. Just him and the store. And every week, like clockwork, they came. The man in the modified martial arts uniform, with fists like hammers and a smile like venom. He never used a name. People called him the Black Belt. And that was enough. His job was simple: walk the street, collect protection fees, and make examples of anyone who forgot their place. Ion hadn't forgotten. He just chose not to kneel. The first time the man showed up, Ion had looked him straight in the eye and said, "My father never paid. I won't either." His voice didn't shake. Not then. Not even when the man leaned in, grinning like he'd just found a new toy. Brave. The man had said, "Let's see how long that lasts." It lasted 3 weeks. Each visit grew darker. The threats sharpened, the tone twisted. And still, Ion stood behind his dusty counter and repeated the same words. No. Early that morning he'd known something was coming. He had swept the storefront twice, made sure the cameras still worked, even though he knew they wouldn't help. And when the bell above the door rang and the man stepped inside, Ion didn't flinch. "I hear you've been making a statement," the man had said, tapping his fingers on the tip jar like a drumbeat. Ion kept his hands below the counter. "I'm just running my father's store." "That's so." The thug leaned in, voice dropping. "Then maybe your father should have taught you when to shut up." The slap came fast, open palm, full force. Lion's head snapped sideways, then the man came around the counter, fast, brutal. Ion barely had time to move before he was slammed to the floor. He tried to twist free, but the knee dropped on his arm with full body weight. That's when the bone snapped. The scream echoed through the neighborhood, and no one moved until now. Chuck Norris stood beside him like a shadow came to life. The boy could barely see through the pain, but he felt it. Someone was here. Someone had come. Not to take over, not to shout, just to stand, just to be the line. And for the first time since the Black Belt had come to this street, someone told him no, without saying a word. He didn't have a name anyone used anymore. They just called him the Black Belt, like that told you everything. You needed to know, and it did. He moved through the streets like he owned them, not because he said so, but because no one ever said otherwise. Power hung off his shoulders the way that dark, sleeveless martial arts jacket did. Frayed at the edges, patched in places, but always worn with pride. His belt, jet black and aged with sweat and history, was never tied too tight. Loose, casual, like it had nothing left to prove. Because to him, it didn't. He'd once been something real years ago, a rising name in the dojo circuit. Regional competitions, medals, patches, a future. But that was before he discovered how much easier it was to be feared than respected. Now he sold his technique to street crews, taught enforcement to thugs who couldn't count to 10, and handled the stubborn cases himself. His fists were his calling card, and his reputation was printed in bruises. Every week, his route took him past the same shops, the same vendors, the same faces who nodded and paid and kept their heads down. It was like clockwork, efficient, unchallenged, until this boy, Ion, the kid who thought honor meant something, who thought legacy could protect him, the kid who looked him in the face and said no. And that's why the Black Belt didn't just collect from Ion. He punished him publicly. He wanted the street to watch because fear doesn't work in whispers. It needs an audience. He had broken the kid's arm the way you snap the stick of kindling. Efficient, loud, messy enough to make people flinch. It worked. People froze. Phones came out, but no one moved except for one man. The thug noticed him. Now, older, slower looking, with a jacket at his feet and quiet in his bones. He stepped away from Ion and squared up, hands loose at his sides. "You really want to do this, old man?" the thug called out. "You think this is your moment or something?" The man didn't respond, didn't blink, just looked at him like he was measuring a storm. "Let me guess," the thug continued, grinning. "You saw one of those YouTube videos. Some more of that putting down a punk with a lucky punch. And now you think you're the sequel?" Still no answer. The black belt rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles. "Fine by me. I could use a warm-up." But as he stepped closer, something caught him. Not fear, not hesitation, just a flicker. The man's stance was all wrong. For a civilian, too grounded, too calm. His shoulders didn't flinch, his weight didn't shift. He wasn't getting ready. He was ready. And for the first time in a long time, the black belt felt something slip just for a second. Control. The crowd that always obeyed, the street that always stood still. Someone had stepped out of the crowd, and nothing felt guaranteed anymore. Chuck stood still. Not frozen, not hesitant. Still like something carved from the very bones of the earth. His arms hung relaxed by his sides, fingers half-curled, breathing calm and even. The wind tugged lightly at the hem of his shirt. A street vendor's tarp flapped somewhere behind him. And the man in the black belt suddenly wasn't sure if he was looking at a bystander or something older, something heavier. The crowd began to shift. Not much, just subtle movements. Phones lowered, eyes narrowed. A woman at the fruit stall stepped back, dragging her child behind her. A teenager whispered to another, "Do you see how he's standing?" The thug smirked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "You know," he said, tilting his head, "I was just going to walk away after that little lesson. Let the boy crawl back to his shelf of expired soup and learn his place." He took a step forward. "But now, old man, now I think I got to teach 2 lessons. Still, Chuck said nothing. Instead, he reached down, calm, no rush, no posturing. His fingers gripped the collar of his jacket, lying crumpled on the asphalt. He lifted it slightly, brushed the dust off with one swift motion, and let it hang from his left hand. The thug scoffed. "You are folding laundry now?" Chuck's eyes never left his. He bent at the knee, laid the jacket gently across the hood of a nearby parked scooter, and turned back. Shoulders square, feet planted, weight balanced. Everything about his stance looked practiced, but not showy, not sport, functional, measured, lethal. The black belt's grin faltered. Across the street, an old man leaned out of a window. "Is that?" he whispered, not finishing the thought. A younger man nearby answered under his breath, "No way. He wouldn't be here." But even as they said it, they didn't believe it, because there was something about the silence that surrounded him now. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't uncertain. It was deliberate, like the quiet before verdict. The thug bounced lightly on his toes, regaining rhythm. "You're just another tough guy playing hero," he muttered, more to himself now. "These streets are mine." Chuck's lips didn't move, but his presence began to crush the air around them, a pressure building. The thug swung his arms once, loosening up, and then raised his fists chest high. "Fine, let's get this over with." But Chuck didn't move, didn't blink, didn't flinch. And something in that, in the absence of reaction, was louder than any threat the black belt had ever heard. Because there's a kind of silence that screams, and Chuck Norris had just wrapped the whole street in it. The first punch came fast, a sharp jab aimed directly at Chuck's face. Quick, efficient, not meant to intimidate, meant to land. It didn't. Chuck tilted his head less than an inch. The fist sliced through air where his nose had been a heartbeat earlier. His eyes didn't even blink. The thug narrowed his gaze, followed with a second punch, then a third. A right cross aimed at Chuck's temple. Chuck pivoted just enough. The strike missed, but barely. His boots didn't leave the ground. He wasn't retreating. He was reading. The thug backed up half a step, confused at how none of the hits landed. Not because Chuck was fast, but because he was precise. Every movement was small, controlled, designed not to waste effort. "Are you dodging forever?" The black belt snapped, circling. "Or are you going to hit back like a man?" Chuck didn't answer. His face gave away nothing, just a faint lift of his left brow, as if he was waiting for something the other man hadn't figured out yet. The crowd was growing. Now from windows, doorways, and alley shadows, they weren't cheering. They weren't shouting. They were just watching, silent. The same kind of silence Chuck carried inside him. The black belt lunged again, this time with a low kick aimed at Chuck's thigh. It landed. Chuck didn't flinch. The thug smirked, feeling the thud of contact through his shin. But his satisfaction lasted half a second because Chuck shifted slightly, redirecting the energy through his frame instead of resisting it. He absorbed the strike, stepped forward, and for the first time lifted a hand. Not to punch, to catch. The thug threw another jab. Chuck paired it with his forearm, redirected the arm past him, and gently tapped the man's shoulder, almost like a sparring coach pointing out an opening. The thug jerked back, now visibly annoyed. "You think this is a joke?" Still no answer. Chuck adjusted his footing, hands loose, shoulders down. No stance that matched any known form, just presence. The presence of a man who didn't need style. He had structure. The black belt snapped. He charged in with a spinning back fist, the kind that could break a jaw if it landed. But it didn't. Chuck ducked, not dramatically, just enough. He let the fist pass above his head, then straightened with a small breath. Eyes now level on the man's exposed ribs. He didn't strike, just looked. Let the thug realize what he'd left open. That pause did something. Not to Chuck, to everyone else. A teen in the crowd whispered, "He's not fighting to win, he's fighting to show him how wrong he is." The thug let out a frustrated growl and came at him again. 2 punches, a knee, another kick. Chuck blocked each one. Compact, clinical, the kind of defense that didn't care about pain or style, just efficiency. And still, no counterattack. That did more damage than any punch could have. "You're scared to hit back?" The thug sneered. "Are you afraid of what happens when you fail?" Chuck finally spoke. 4 words, calm, steady, inevitable. "I don't miss twice." The thug froze for a second. His confidence so loud before now stumbled over its own noise. And then Chuck moved. A single elbow strike, clean, tight, close range. It hit the center mass. The thug staggered back 2 steps. Wind knocked from him. The crowd didn't cheer. They held their breath. Chuck didn't follow. He simply adjusted his feet. Ready again. No celebration, no smile, just waiting. The message was clear now, not just to the thug, but to the entire block. This wasn't a fight. This was a correction, and Chuck Norris had just started grading the test. The black belt's lungs burned. He hadn't expected this. Not from a man who hadn't thrown more than a single elbow. Not from someone who hadn't even raised his voice. And yet here he was, backpedaling after one hit. One clean, silent blow that felt like it had come from the street itself. Chuck didn't advance, didn't chase. He just watched. That unnerved the thug more than anything. Fighting loud men was easy. They yelled, they showed off. They needed you to know how dangerous they were. This one, he didn't need you to know anything. The thug spat on the ground, rolling his shoulders. "Lucky shot," he muttered. "More for himself than anyone else. You won't get another." He came in faster, this time. Years of training stitched into muscle memory took over. Left jab, right cross, hook, low sweep, another hook, clean form, no wasted steps. This time, Chuck absorbed one. A sharp right cross slipped through. It struck him clean across the cheek, spinning his head sideways. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Blood. A thin line of it crept down the corner of Chuck's lip. He staggered back. 2 steps, not out of fear, but because physics demanded it. The thug grinned, showing teeth. "Yeah," he breathed. "Bleed, oh man." Chuck reset his feet, wiped the blood away with the back of his hand. His eyes never left the man in front of him. The thug didn't wait. He launched a front kick aimed at Chuck's ribs. It landed with a heavy thud, sending Chuck stumbling back against a roll of plastic crates stacked outside a shop. One toppled, crashing to the ground. The crowd recoiled, unsure if the fight had turned. The silence that had once felt reverberant began to tilt toward dread. The thug felt it too and fed on it. He charged, a downward hammer fist slammed toward Chuck's head. Chuck raised his arm to block, but that left his midsection open. And the thug knew it. A brutal knee crashed into Chuck's side, his jaw clenched, body recoiling. His stance faltered, if only for half a breath. "You're not built for this," the thug growled, circling. "You came here for a moment. I live here." Chuck didn't speak, but something in his shoulders shifted, almost imperceptibly. The thug lunged again, this time spinning with a back fist. It caught the edge of Chuck's jaw, just barely, but enough to send him stumbling sideways into a lamppost. His hand caught the metal to stay upright. Blood now trickled from both corners of his mouth. His breathing came harder, and still he stood. The black belt pressed the attack. He threw a wild combo, jab to the chest, high kick toward the head, then a low sweep aimed to take Chuck's legs out from under him. Chuck jumped back, but not far enough. The thug's shin clipped his ankle. Chuck dropped to one knee. The crowd stirred. Phones shook in my hands. A woman whispered, "He's going down." The thug saw the moment, smelled it. He rushed in, hand cocked for a knockout blow. Chuck looked up from the pavement, not in fear, in calculation. He let the punch fly, then leaned just enough for it to miss. He pushed up from the ground as it passed, and in that same motion, drove. A tight, compact fist straight into the thug's exposed ribs, right below the floating rib. The sound wasn't loud, but the reaction was. The thug gasped, staggering back, eyes wide. The pain wasn't just physical, it was psychological. That moment when you realize you gave a man his opening. Chuck didn't wait. He stepped in, closer than was comfortable, too close for wide strikes. Elbow to the shoulder, palm to the sternum. Pivot, another elbow to the chin. The thug's rhythm broke. He stumbled. Chuck caught the collar of his jacket and slammed him into a steel post. The thug roared, swinging wildly. Chuck ducked, redirected the momentum, and flung him sideways into a pile of milk crates. Plastic burst apart. The thug collapsed in a heap. The crowd didn't cheer. They inhaled, sharp, collective, stunned. Chuck adjusted his footing. The thug scrambled up now with dirt on his face and sweat streaking down his temple. His mouth was open wide, breathing heavy. He looked around for anything and found a loose pipe among the debris. He grabbed it, swung. Chuck ducked under the arc, stepped inside and drove a knee into the thug's stomach, doubling him over. Then he caught the pipe midair and twisted it from a man's grip. He didn't even look where he tossed it. The thug tried again. A jab, a kick, a desperate elbow. Chuck blocked them all, no longer absorbing, now dissecting. Every movement Chuck made now came sharper, crisper, faster. His strikes weren't brutal. They were surgical, one to the bicep, one to the thigh, one to the collarbone. They weren't just meant to hurt. They were meant to take him apart. The thug backed up, 2 steps, 3. His face twisted in something new. Uncertainty. Chuck stepped forward, once, then again, and the crowd knew the fight had officially changed hands. The thug stumbled back 3 steps, chest heaving, pipe gone, hands raw from slipping grip and wild swings. Sweat soaked his back. His black bell hung looser now, tilted like even it no longer wanted to be part of him. Chuck stood in front of him, unhurried, unbothered. 1 step forward, then another. His eyes didn't glare. They watched, measured, exact, unflinching. The thug tried to recover the swagger. What are you?" he snapped, spitting blood onto the pavement. Some kind of ghost? Chuck didn't answer. He didn't need to. The street answered for him, not in words, but in silence, a silence that no longer felt passive. It fell aligned, like the people had chosen, and they hadn't chosen fear this time. The thug glanced around. The crowd had grown larger. No police, no shouts, just eyes, all of them watching one thing, him fall apart. He snapped again with a roar. He launched himself forward, a tight front kick aimed at Chuck's midsection. Chuck caught it, mid-air, with one arm. The thug's eyes went wide. Chuck held the leg for a beat, long enough for everyone to understand what just happened, then yanked it upward while sweeping the other leg clean from ground. The man slammed onto the concrete with a thud that echoed off the storefronts. Chuck didn't pounce, didn't finish it. He stepped back and gave him space, an insult worse than any blow. The black belt rolled over, coughing, wheezing. He forced himself up on one elbow, then onto his knees. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, mixing with the dirt. Still he stood, but now everything was different. His feet were unsure, his hands shook. Chuck waited. The thug lunged again, wild now, no technique, just panic. Chuck ducked one swing, slipped a second, and punished the opening with a stiff strike to the ribs. The thug bent sideways, and Chuck followed with a short-range elbow to the neck, controlled, not crippling. The man collapsed against a trash bin, struggling to stay on his feet. "I beat real fighters," he gasped. "I fought in rings, dojos, you're no one." Chuck's voice came low, calm. "Then you already know what happens when your form breaks down." The thug screamed in frustration and grabbed a nearby broom leaning against a wall. He swung it like a bat. Chuck didn't move. He waited. The swing came. Chuck sidestepped, caught the handle, twisted it, and the thug lost control. Again, the broom spun through the air and clattered down the alley. Chuck didn't even watch it fall. The thug dropped to one knee. Chuck approached step by step, quiet as ever. His shadow fell over the man. For the first time, real fear entered the thug's face. He tried to get up, legs trembling, mouth open. A punch came, but it was weak, desperate, full of loss. Chuck didn't block. He let it graze his shoulder and replied with a single punishing elbow to the man's jaw. Crack. The thug's head snapped sideways, his legs gave out. He collapsed to both knees and the ground, gasping. Chuck stood over him, not angry, not gloating, just present, like justice incarnate. The man rolled onto his side, coughing, clutching his ribs. Chuck didn't kick him, didn't strike again. He spoke just once more. Strength never had a shout. Then he turned, and behind him, the entire street stood still. No cheers, just understanding. The tyrant had fallen, and the man who dropped him had barely raised his voice. The thug lay in a half-crouch, panting. Blood smeared his chin and his brow, one side of his jacket. His black belt had come untied, dragging behind him like a forgotten leash. He looked less like a fighter now, more like a man trying to outrun the truth that had finally caught up with him. Chuck Norris stood nearby, silent, centered. He didn't advance. He didn't flinch. He simply stood still, like the gravity in the scene had changed, and he was the new center. The crowd had changed too, no longer just bystanders. Something had shifted. Shopkeepers had stepped out from behind their windows. A delivery driver had turned off his engine and leaned forward. Even the teenagers had lowered their phones. Watch it with bare hands now, no filters, no screens, just presence. They weren't watching a fight anymore, they were watching a reckoning. The thug wiped his mouth and pushed himself to his feet. His stance was unbalanced. The left leg shook slightly. His breathing was ragged, shoulders rising and falling too fast. He didn't lunge this time. He ran, not away, forward toward Chuck, wild, reckless, primal. Chuck waited. The man swung, a heavy overhand, meant to be a last word. Chuck slipped it easily. The man followed with a knee, then a desperate elbow. Chuck blocked both, redirecting the force, stepping around the chaos like he was dancing with memory. A pipe clattered in the alley behind them. The thug saw it, stumbled toward it, grabbed it. He turned, pipe raised, screaming now, not from rage but from something closer to panic. Chuck didn't back away. He stepped in, the pipe came down. Chuck caught the man's wrist mid-swing, twisted. There was a pop, not loud, but enough. The thug cried out and dropped the pipe instantly, clutching his wrist as he dropped to one knee. Chuck kicked the pipe away, cleaned across the street. It clanged against the curb and spun to a stop under a bench. Still, Chuck didn't strike. Instead, he looked around. To the people, to the silence, a woman in a headscarf whispered, "He's showing him restraint." The thug staggered upright again, refusing to fall. He was trembling now, his balance gone, techniques shredded to ribbons. "Do you think this proves anything?" He barked through gritted teeth. "You're just one guy." Chuck tilted his head slightly. One was enough. The thug looked around, expecting someone, anyone to back him up, but the crowd didn't move. They weren't with him anymore. He wasn't feared, he was alone, and in that moment, something inside him cracked, not bone, not tendon pride. It drained from him like the blood from his.